Hello, my name is Pam Grady. I am a San Francisco journalist with the San Francisco Chronicle and 48 Hills and the Alliance of Women Film Journalists. And I am here with Tomm Moore, the co-founder of Cartoon Saloon, who the man and the company that has brought us The Secret of Kells, Song of the Sea, and now Wolfwalkers. He received Academy Award nominations for those first two, so perhaps there will be a third in the offing soon. So Tomm, this is the third of a trilogy of Irish folklore, and apparently the last one. What was the original inspiration to do these films? And is this really the end? Because it just seems like there's endless Irish folklore that you could take a deep dive into.
Yeah, what this is sort of like a triptych, let's say, that these three movies have ended up exploring similar themes, and we've been evolving a similar style, etc. And I think in this format, I think this is the last one like this. But now that you say it, I don't think that there'll ever be an end to delving into folklore, but probably other directors or even myself will find different directions to take it, you know.
Yeah. What was the original impulse? What was the thing that set you off on this path to begin with?
Well, Secret of Kells really was the movie that we thought if we could make that, that'd be enough and we'd all go and get real jobs. There was no original inclination to make three movies. We thought if we could get Secret of Kells off the ground, that'd be great. And that was an inclination going back to our college days back in the 90s when we wanted to kind of both reinvent 2D animation and try and tell some Irish stories from an Irish point of view, because we felt that, you know, like we were really inspired by the work of Studio Ghibli, for example. Mm-hmm. And we also felt that a lot of international movies like were kind of inspired by myth from all over the world. I remember seeing Mulan at one point. I remember seeing Richard Williams' uncompleted Thief and the Cobbler, which was inspired by Persian art. And we just thought, why don't we delve into Irish art and folklore and history and see if we can tell a story from that point of view ourselves. So we were maybe a little naive and dreamy-eyed animation students in college, and we thought we can do it, you know. And anyway, we did. 20 years later, we're still at
it. And one thing that struck me, I mean, granted, these are family films, so it makes total sense to have children as the lead characters. But when I was watching this, I thought of, well, this week in America, there was a young girl, a teenager in Houston, won a science award for coming up with a possible treatment for coronavirus.
Wow.
And you've got Greta Thunberg leading the charge on climate change. And it strikes me that the three children, that all the children in your three movies they're leading the adults too. Yeah. So talk about that concept of the children shall lead us.
Yeah, I know. And isn't it sad that we need that? But I feel like as a parent, I always realize that there's a point of transition in everyone's lives. And I guess I'm in that like midlife transition period, but there's this crucial moment where young people have to kind of define themselves in society. And it's that kind of moment where they can change the world or the world will change them. And I always think there's so much commonality for all of us to see when we look back at that time period in our life, and we can often trace an awful lot of the journey of our life back to those moments, those transition moments. And I think a lot of folklore speaks to those kind of transitions as well. And so I suppose there's a little bit of an epidemic of helicopter parenting as well, and just a general sort of attitude that kids need to be sort of controlled. And actually, I think we need to open our hearts to them and hear them, because especially somebody like Greta, so inspiring. And after all, they're the ones that are going to inherit the mess that we're all living through, you know. So I think it's important. I mean, I don't know. There's a little bit of therapy in making movies, and I do see when I look back on it, I've been working through a lot of themes of being a parent and being a dad, and even my own relationships. So I don't want to overanalyze my own work too much, but there's definitely a through line there of needing to find your own place in the world in opposition to the society that you're, the backdrop of the society that you're from.
And this film, in specifically Wolfwalkers, you have the town and then the wildness outside, and it's kind of a clash between civilization and wilderness, which is something that goes on constantly in our world. Talk about that as an inspiration for a story.
Well, yeah, Ross and I, who co-directed Wolfwalkers, were talking about that early on. I mean, 7 years ago, this was super relevant, and it's only gotten more and more relevant. You know, I just finished a short film with Greenpeace about the invasion of industrial animal agriculture into the Amazon, and how so much of the Amazon is being destroyed to grow crops for, you know, animals. And just the coronavirus that we're all living through, I mean, it comes from a disconnection to wildlife and the way we're treating animals, in particular plants, everything, with a lack of respect. I think it's what's causing a lot of the ills in the modern world. We've lost a balance there, you know. So it's more like it's not two geographical locations really, because animation is kind of in the language of dreams or the language of symbols. It's kind of two worldviews, you know. There's a worldview of trying to control everything. That's what the town symbolizes, trying to tame wildness. And then the forest kind of represents a more, you know, pantheistic way of looking at the world, a more overall animist way of being in the world, a wilder, more open way of being. That's more about, it's almost a little bit more Taoist or something. It's about being part of nature rather than kind of looking to control nature, or even with the best will in the world. I think an awful lot of environmentalists have looked at nature as like this nice little garden that they want to take care of, where actually nature is red of tooth and claw. You know, we are of nature. We can't, it's a folly to see ourselves as separate to it. So those were the kind of worldviews we were trying to represent in the two different art styles.
Well, also the idea of town in this, and also in Kells, is it's human beings have this tendency to think of themselves as controlling everything, but they're in these walled environments where that's the only way they feel safe is behind walls.
I mean, walls, I can't believe how relevant, like when we made Secret of Kells, whatever, was it 15 years ago or something now? And I remember the composer, Bruno Coulet, invited me to see his students in the conservatoire in Paris play the score to a live projection of Secret of Kells. And it was on the day that Donald Trump was elected, on the chorus of Build a Wall, Build a Wall. And I couldn't believe that our story was talking about how walls are a bad idea and we need to not like build walls between ourselves and the rest of the world. And it's still so relevant. And I mean, the medieval town of Kilkenny that I grew up in famously had medieval walls around it. I mean, it's a natural instinct, but I think there's a worldview or a mindset again where you think you can wall yourself off from the world and protect yourself in that way. And all you do is make yourself smaller and the world smaller. Like controlling people through fear or from an autocratic point of view like that, and making everything beyond a certain barrier the other, is a big part of the mess we're in, I think.
And in Secret of Kells, you had a boy that was the lead character. In Song of the Sea, it's still, I mean, there is the Arselki, but it's mostly the boy pushing things along. And now, but in this, you have the two girls, Robin and Meb. Talk about making girls, tapping into that girl power for this.
Well, I gotta say, in the making of this movie, I was lucky enough to be able to welcome into my family a little granddaughter, which is really special. But prior to that, you know, I grew up a little boy. My son was a little boy, and Song of the Sea was actually very much based on my son, Ben. He was the main character, and it was really based on him. And there was a relationship I had with my younger sister that I think I was drawing on for Brendan and Aisling and Ben and Saoirse. So for Wolfwalkers, you know, at the beginning, Ross and I had a story with a little boy, a hunter trying to be like his dad, and he meets Maeve. And, you know, we were kind of going down a track that we'd gone down before. And the story wasn't really working because we had to put all these obstacles in the way of a little boy who wanted to be a hunter in this society. Because actually there weren't that many obstacles for a young boy in that society, but all the obstacles were against the little girl. So fairly early on, in like maybe the second or third draft, we realized that the main problem was that Robin needed to be a little girl. And then I suddenly just did a few sketches based on my wife as a child, and her spirit, like she's super fierce and super independent and really loves animals, and everything just clicked into place when I imagined Robin as that kind of character. And Ross totally agreed that we realized everything clicked into place because the world was against a little girl, especially in 1650. I mean, I know it's not hugely better now, but I mean, it's not 1650. Some of the stuff we researched was pretty terrifying, of how women were treated in that time. You were either a witch, or you were a maid. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't have many options as a young woman. So Robin's conflict, her story made so much more sense that way. And then the character came to life for us. And then her relationship with Maeve just opened up, completely became a different thing. And that friendship and that first important relationship, whenever you meet your opposite in the world, that the person that represents everything you wish you could be, it just made so much more sense with the both of them as like two kind of opposite female characters. And there's something else we talked a little bit about spirituality there. There's something else in, I think, the pagan spirituality that we were drawing on in the outside world, that nature, like we were looking at a lot of the carvings of the Sheila and the Gig, which are all female kind of goddess carvings that are all over the pre-Christian holy sites in Ireland. And so we felt this was a story of somewhat about a reclaiming of a matriarchy that was maybe being overturned by a patriarchy that was represented by Lord Protector and that Puritan worldview,
And was it purely coincidental that Maeve is a redhead?
Coincidental? I don't think so. I think there's a fieriness that's associated. Like Paul has our producing partner, Paul has a little daughter who's called Robin, but she looks exactly like Maeve. And there's a certain personality type that I think we associate in Ireland with the redhead.
Yeah, my mom's a redhead. That was.
Oh yeah, I was just wondering. There's a person, yeah, and maybe it's like pseudoscience or some kind of cliche superstition, but there is a sensibility that when you see someone with fiery red hair, that they're going to have a fiery personality like Maeve.
And talk about the design of the wolves, because there's the Wolfwalkers and the way who, even though they're wolves, kind of retain some sort of human look.
Yeah.
As opposed to the wildness of the wolves.
Yeah, the other wolves were like, the main wolves were really designed to be just like scribbly, scratchy, almost, just like wildness personified. And we have a lot of rough line work and the energy popping off them. But they also are, we played on the idea of wolves as a kind of totem for wildness, like wolves as a kind of symbol for wildness. But then the Wolfwalkers have to be between the two worlds, because this is actually, a human intelligence in a wolf body. And even in the way we designed them, we wanted to have something of their human counterparts. So Maeve has kind of got a stocky, earthy, heavy presence in both her forms, as human or a wolf. And then Robin is a little bit more spindly, a little bit more cautious, maybe a little bit more elegant. And when she's first in her body, she's a little bit clumsy because she's not used to being a quadruped. So we have a little bit of, they keep their eyes similar. And yeah, there's a lot of little tricks, little visual and tricks and little movement tricks to show that they're not just a wolf, they're something else.
And talk about the research you did into this, because you've got the folklore element and then you have the Lord Protector, who's based on Cromwell. So how deep of a dive did you do into folklore, and how deep into the history of Ireland itself?
Oh, well, we're steeped in that stuff. And I mean, this is the third movie that that's kind of been a continuity of exploring Irish folklore and history. But again, it's a shopping trip. But we wanted to tell a story that was set then, but for today, to speak to today. And so we called him Lord Protector. For a long time, we called him Oliver Cromwell. And Oliver Cromwell is like the big baddie of Irish history. He's almost like the Grinch, I mean, not only did he, he was pretty merciless as a military leader, but also as a Puritan and a true believer. He canceled Christmas because he saw it as too frivolous and all this kind of stuff. So Oliver Cromwell was an interesting character to to play with, because he's a hero in the UK, and in Ireland he's kind of seen as the beginning of the end of the Irish like indigenous culture and the kind of Anglicization of Ireland, because he was so ruthless. And he deliberately, like he Ireland was called Wolfland, and he deliberately made a kind of mission of his own to kill all the wolves in Ireland as a way to show that he was subduing the country and subduing the wildness in Ireland. So that kind of stuff just felt right for the psychological themes we were thinking about. So we kind of took a shopping trip, but we didn't call him Cromwell in the movie, just so that anybody anywhere could watch it and see that he represents a worldview rather than a specific, you know, we didn't want to get too much into Inglourious Bastards territory, because we kind of do what we want with him, and it's unfortunately not the true way Oliver Cromwell finished up. And then for the folklore, it was similar, because the wolves are so long gone in Irish history. And I think that you see in Song of the Sea, what I felt motivated me in Song of the Sea was that there was a loss of connection between people and the wildlife and the environment, by the fact that now that belief in selkies has faded, and people are culling seals, and there's like almost competition for the remaining fish between seals and fishermen. And so you can see that there. But with the wolves, everything that they represented in Irish culture was wiped out when they were wiped out. And what was really interesting when we did the research was that, like, the old Gaelic word for a wolf was Moch Tira, son of the land. And there were so many stories where they compared the rebels hiding out in the forest to wolves, and that wolves were their brothers, and that the people were wolf-like because they wouldn't be tamed. And a whole kind of side to Irish history is mixed up in that folklore. And they weren't werewolves like the German kind of monster werewolves. They were based on a story that St. Patrick had put a curse on some families that wouldn't convert in this area in Kilkenny where I grew up. And they were called the Wolves of Ossory. And they were people that, when they fell asleep, a kind of wolf spirit would leave their body. And anything that happened to that wolf spirit would happen to the sleeping body back at home. But that wolf spirit wasn't like a monster out on the prowl. Very often it would be people would be lost in the forest, and that wolf would find them. And sometimes in the stories, the wolf can talk to people, sometimes not, maybe lead them home through the forest. So we were just kind of looking at all of that stuff and mixing it up into what we hoped would be like a universal story for today.
Well, the wolf aspect of it, it's funny because the story takes place hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and in Ireland, but I connected it to the United States right now because there's this constant battle over wolves in the West. And
when I was in Vancouver last year, I went up to Alberta, and we visited a wolf sanctuary there, and we were reading about that, some of that. Yeah, I think they symbolize something for people still today in the countries that still have them.
Yeah, there's this constant, there's a constant battle for people that want to kill them, and then in places where they've disappeared, a constant battle to bring them back and repatriate them into the, I live in a schizophrenic country. What can I say?
Oh, we all do now. I think it's the culture that we all live in. But I do think it's interesting. I read an article about wolves being reintroduced, I think, to Yellowstone, and how it affected the entire ecosystem. And I think that's what happened in Ireland. Our whole ecosystem went out of balance because the English came and they killed out all the megafauna. And so everything we kind of lost so much with that. So anywhere that there's still wild places, like in the Pacific Northwest, I think it's so precious,
And your animation is so particular. It's the hand drawn. It's so beautiful. Talk about why that aspect is so important to you at a time when so many people are just CGI, but.
Yeah, it's the same thing, I think. I mean, I never say never. I probably won't work in CG, but we use computers quite a lot to help us make these hand-drawn movies, especially now in COVID times. We're all working from home and everything. But the hand-drawn skill set and the craft was what we studied in college. And while I started college in '95, that's when Toy Story came out. I mean, Toy Story was amazing, but it already looked old by the time I was leaving college in '99. You know, the CG animation was going so fast, and it's still like that. Whereas I think the hand-drawn animation is a bit more timeless. You know, like movies like Totoro and stuff, and Bambi, and they're from years and years ago, but they still look fresh. And I think there's a language in hand-drawn animation that, you know, speaks to graphic novels, speaks to, like, it goes back as far as cave art. Like the whole history of painting and drawing is more easily expressed in hand drawn. It's more naturally expressed in hand drawn animation. And that's a language that we have at our fingertips as animators. Whereas if you use a computer, you're kind of reverse engineering, trying to touch on that stuff. But also I think 20 years ago when we set up the studio, we just didn't want to get into video games like a lot of our friends, and we were happy to continue practicing the craft that we loved, and we just wanted to spend our day in a kind of environment where we were drawing a lot, you know.
And do you think, because these three films have been about, folklore, so do you think the hand-drawn style suits that kind of storytelling more?
Yeah, I do actually. I think that's an interesting point, because it's true. I mean, I remember years ago, I think it was John Lasseter, when he was the head of Pixar, said that there was some stories that suited hand drawn and some that suited CG, and I think he's probably right. You can make an argument either way, but definitely fairy tales, you know, they make me think of children's illustrated picture books and stuff, and especially because a lot of them deal with ancient, ancient mythology and stories like that. Feels right to use a kind of retro style for that.
Yeah. Well, I grew up watching, I don't know if you've ever seen these in Ireland. I think they were made in the 50s or 60s, but they showed them on television forever. They were called Fractured Fairy Tales.
Oh yeah, yeah. I didn't see them as a kid, but I know of them now as an animation professional. Yeah.
And those, I mean, they would, those shorts would play really well in front of any of your films. And can you talk about working with the musicians on your composer and your musicians, and is it true that you've written songs for this and Kells?
Yeah, I mean, I'm no musician, so it's more the lyrics, and it's a collaboration. I always feel it's quite generous when they give me a credit, but yeah, Ross is much more a musician than me. He's a trad musician, so he brought a lot to this one. But yeah, we worked with Bruno Coulet and Keela on Secret of Kells, and that was a good relationship, but it was kind of brief. It was more traditional, we kind of had most of the movie made when he came in and wrote the score and worked with Keela, but they hit it off as collaborators. So immediately I was thinking that for Song of the Sea, it would be great to work with them right from the beginning. And that was the start of a much deeper collaboration then, where they were part of even the story process on Song of the Sea. And that just continued naturally into Wolfwalkers. And what was nice about it is Bruno's classical. He always records with an orchestra in Sofia in Bulgaria. And what kind of happened by the time we got to Wolfwalkers, our visual style had evolved and the musical style had evolved, but it was all the same people. So you could feel the threads running back. So in a way, there was sections of the movie that Bruno just left to Keela, because they're the kind of they're the Wolfwalkers of the music. They're the ones that they just jam and find the tune by trying out different instruments and playing together. And Bruno is much more considered. He will write the score and then go and have it played by the orchestra and spend a lot of time, fine tuning it. So it's a nice collaboration, because Keela bring a little bit of chaos or a little bit of wildness to it,
And talk about developing the visual style for this film.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to 2013 when I was still finishing Song of the Sea, and Ross had been a concept artist on Song of the Sea, but then had gone to work in Leica. And when he came back from Leica, we'd had the idea before he left, and there was things that we weren't able to do on Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea that we tried to do, like having different styles for different environments and trying to use the way we drew the characters to reflect what was going on for them. But in the end, we couldn't afford it, and we ended up just putting a simple line around the characters. So we said, let's go for it with this one. This is the last one of this set, and let's really push all those ideas as far as we can. And we'd seen a movie called The Tale of Princess Kaguya from Studio Ghibli, where I was just blown away by how the line work, like the pencil work, you know, if the character was stressed, the lines were stressed. If it was a little baby playing in the grass, all the lines were really soft and sided a pencil. So I just said that's amazing, because that's showing that hand-drawn animation can do something by the way the characters are drawn, or the way the backgrounds and environments are drawn, that can have an emotional impact rather than what they are. How they're drawn is part of it. So that was the manifesto. And then we pushed into like the town style by referencing woodblock prints from that time period. Like in the 1650s, printing was still pretty rudimentary, and they would like make these woodblock prints and then they distribute the pamphlets, and the pamphlets were the fake news of the day, because they were always showing how awful the Irish were to the English people to get them riled up, and there would always be these like grotesque caricatures, but they were also kind of charming in the sense that they were, you know, they were quite aggressively cut out of wood and then printed, and then sometimes the print would slip a little bit, so you'd have the color going a little bit outside the line. So that was the style we applied to the Puritan town. And then we said, let's go the opposite direction in the forest and just use pencil sketches and watercolors, everything we can to be really wild and loose and free in the forest part.
And talk about designing the climactic scene when it all comes together in the forest.
Yeah, I mean, it was a work of a lot of talented artists, and Ross and I had laid down some basic ground rules for the style. Where Ross was art director in Secret of Kells, and I usually design a lot of the characters and do a lot of storyboarding and stuff myself. But for that, we kind of turned to a storyboard artist from Basque Country who was really good at a kind of action stuff, and we worked with 3 different editors to kind of get, and the amount of shots was crazy, because Song of the Sea and Secret of Kells are quite kind of sedate and almost like picture books, whereas for the action sequence we had so many shots and it was really a lot of work. And then we also worked a lot on the palette, that we had fire, angular fire coming into this curvy forest, which was, you know, had to be designed very carefully, and we had to design a whole progression as the fire moved through the forest, and then the magic was coming from the cave, the golden magic was coming from the cave in the opposite direction. So the whole evolution of the color scheme and the background and the effects animation of fire and magic was the backdrop against which we had to animate an army and a pack of wolves, and also we had to do a lot of parallel editing, which is something I'd never done before, which is really tricky, where we were cutting from inside the cave where Maeve is healing her mum, where Robin is now confidently leading a pack of wolves, and where Lord Protector is leading all his men into the forest to kill them, and we were cutting between 3 different sequences. So yeah, it was kind of epic.
And you also write graphic novels. How does talk about how those 2 things, 2 careers feed into each other?
Yeah, well, what was really nice was I got to make a really nice graphic novel of Wolfwalkers with Little Brown. And what was really cool about it was a lot of ideas that we had for the movie that there wasn't time for, we were able to put into the graphic novel. And that was the same with the Secret of Kells graphic novels. And I wish I could do more comics. I love comics, and they were, my original ambition was to be a comic book artist or a tattoo artist or something, but I ended up in animation. But yeah, you're asking what the difference is between the 2?
Yeah, well, how they feed into each other.
I think I would probably steal a lot from graphic novel language into the movies. You know, we use a lot of the same language of what I always love about comics is that all that stuff, like there's a great comic book artist called Cyril Pedrosa. The French comic book tradition, the bande dessinée, is so creative and so artistic. And Cyril Pedrosa did some concepts for us early on, because he made a comic called The 3 Shadows, which was set in the time period. And he used everything at his disposal to make the page expressive and interesting. And so we bring that stuff in, you know, like those jagged borders. Whenever something violent happens, the screen changes shape, and we can kind of control where the audience looks by breaking the screen up. And I think it's using the fact that we're dealing with drawings and not being afraid of that, rather than trying to always emulate a live action camera. I think that's the main thing. And then going in the other direction, I guess going in the other direction is that the movement and stuff that you can bring from animation, and the sensibility for character expression and stuff, you can bring that into a graphic novel if you're if you're going in the other direction. But I've honestly had more experience trying to drag comic book stuff into movies rather than the other way around.
And you were not done yet when COVID hit. So how did
No.
that affect you as you were heading towards the finish line of this movie?
Well, we were lucky in the sense that we had a lot of the music recorded. That really had to be done in person because, as I described earlier, Keela need to be there in the room with all their instruments and everything. So Ross and I had just finished that about 2 weeks before, and Bruno and his team had recorded the music with Keela in Grouse Lodge here in Ireland. So then the lockdown happened, and we had a little bit of drawing to finish. Mostly it was the final compositing of all the artwork together, which is a big job in itself. But we managed to do that from home, and it was hard on the artist, but it was possible. At least we all knew each other so well. We've been working together for almost 3 years by then, so it wasn't too bad. Like, there wasn't bad communication problems, so we're pretty lucky. Maybe the thing I was most worried about, but actually also turned out to be okay, was we had to record the song that Aurora sings. She was meant to come to Dublin to sing it, and there was a few tweaks to the words, and there was stuff that we had to do, and we just did that. She did that from her home in Bergen in Norway, and it worked great. You know, we did it like the way I'm talking to you. We just chatted like this, and then she'd record it and we'd listen to it. So yeah, we were lucky. It didn't affect us as much as it might have if it had been just a few weeks sooner.
And now it's coming out in the middle of COVID. So
yeah, that's much more. Yeah, that's been much more sort of impactful. And the fact that I'm talking to you now like this rather than in person, for example. And I mean, I'm concerned about the environment. It's probably good not to be flying all around the world all the time, but at the same time, it is quite odd. I mean, most of the promotion has been done online, and there's been amazing support from Apple and our partners, our theatrical partners like G Kids and so forth. And it's kind of a pity because I always wondered if one of our movies with like the right support in the marketing could compete in a box office way, or was it always going to be a bit too arty and niche? And I thought with this one we might find out, because we had the might of Apple behind it, as well as our long-term partners, G Kids. But I guess we'll never know now. It's just, I think the majority of people who see it in cinemas will be the lucky ones, and they'll be sitting a few seats apart, and maybe maximum 50 in the theater at the time. And then everybody else will probably see it on Apple TV Plus, which isn't so bad. And it was always the case that the majority of people would find it online. So that's okay.
And then for my final question, is there anything you want to add? Is there anything you want us to know about Wolfwalkers?
No, I think the best thing is for people to take from it what they will. I think that's it. At a certain point, you release something into the world, and you have to let people. You know, I think when you're dealing with mythology, you can ruin it by overly stating what you intended, and you can let people read into it what they do, and hope that they read into it what you intended. But you know, I think it's time to let it go. But I would like to plug, while I have a chance, I would like to plug a short film I just finished for Greenpeace called "There's a Monster in My Kitchen," about the destruction of the Amazon, and it will be released with Wolfwalkers in theaters in the States and Canada and in some other countries. So people should watch out for that, and if they're moved by that, they should sign the petition on greenpeace.com.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been lovely talking to you.
You too, Pam.
Okay. Bye-bye.
See ya.